want to let people know that the next book that I'm going to be talking about is Out of Babylon by Walter Brueggemann. So this is one that I would recommend you get. I'll be spending enough time on it. If you have any interest in this, Walter Brueggemann is a Christian theologian, and his treatment of Babylon is really intriguing and I think quite applicable to our times, and he does that himself. So I'll be turning to Out of Babylon. Again, one more reminder, I have in the show notes a link to a sign up where you can basically sign up for future summer seminars and probably other opportunities to engage. But I had a seminar this summer that really went quite well, and I'm planning on doing another one in summer 2022 on Christian anarchism. In this particular episode, I don't want to talk about World War I anymore, and I also want to refrain from talking about the most current event of Afghanistan, which I mentioned last time, the ongoing tragic events in Afghanistan. I think that everybody is fully aware of that, but in thinking about that and focusing on that, or whatever the latest tragic debacle is in the unfolding drama of U.S. foreign policy, once again, we take our focus away from what we can do something about immediately and tangibly to something which is kind of outside of our control. But what we can influence is that which is closer to us. And when we focus too much on national politics and on the latest news stories, whether they're foreign or domestic, we take our eyes off of the ball, so to speak, that we actually could pass, that we actually could do something about. So I want to focus in on this theme of vengeance or forgiveness in our own lives, in our own places. Because even though I often preach against too much individualism, there is a point at which we are, at least we can say we are responsible for ourselves. Or if we can't say that at all, then there's not much point in talking further. And when it comes to forgiveness or vengeance, vengeance is the easier route, right? It's the thing that seems to make the most sense because the harms and slights of life are endless. And certainly in the United States, we know this keeps a whole industry going, media industry, entertainment industry, and there are real strong reasons for people to feel this way and to feel that vengeance is in order or retribution. What I do want to focus on is the ping pong match that I've referred to of late between the Republicans and the Democrats, since so many people in this country identify strongly with one position or another. And it brought to mind this movie I watched recently starring Liam Neeson. It was called The Ice Road. But it could be just about any Liam Neeson movie, and I'm going to totally confess I really like Liam Neeson movies and movies like that. I'm fully conscious and aware of the contradiction, so don't tell me I'm contradicting myself, because I know I am, okay? But I know myself well enough to know that this theme of vengeance and retribution and sort of just kick-ass, badass, like take charge behavior is a part of my deep personality. And so when I watch a movie like that, I'm thinking, well, this gives expression to that which is within me, but I do understand that this is not something smart to do, or a particularly smart way to act. I also thought about Liam Neeson in these types of movies and Ice Road because he depicts a type of American that Hollywood stars, like maybe Neeson, I don't know, but like Hollywood stars preach against, right? The sort of right-wing individualist, rugged individualist who just goes out and kicks butt and takes names. But at the same time, their bread and butter is this type of movie, which they continually churn out, and they don't ask themselves deeply the question, is what we're providing in the way of entertainment actually supporting what we say we don't approve of? Well, of course it is. So there's a great irony there. But the Republicans in the United States right now, of course, they've changed quite a bit over the years, but they can certainly point to being culturally marginalized and made fun of, having their values mocked, whether they're Christian values or traditional values as they see them, being left behind economically, especially in the rural Midwest and in the South, and being cannon fodder because of their economic needs that have been unmet as the economy has changed, and their higher levels of patriotism, felt patriotism, which makes it easier for them to move from a state of precarity into military service. The advent of the Trump phenomenon and the appeal of Donald Trump early on was one part of it was, Trump's theme that these wars that the United States were engaged in were not beneficial and we needed to get out of them. And I think that part of the appeal of Trump was that a lot of people sensed that people in these areas, they sensed that they were being kind of used as cannon fodder in these endless, meaningless wars. And finally somebody came along and basically said that. He said it in a very crass way, but he still said it, okay? So all of that leads them to feel like they need to strike back, that they are being victimized, that they are being stepped on. And to a certain extent, they are. Now, they should acknowledge that they themselves helped create an economy and a culture where some are so far above others in income and in life ways that they don't even see people like themselves, right? That they maybe didn't know exactly what they were doing, but they were supporting economic policies and economic philosophies that led to an elite, a sort of financial and cultural elite emerging that is so distant from their way of life that there's no empathy there, or a decreasing amount of empathy between the two. But they haven't been able to recognize or acknowledge that yet. And that's partly because their field of vision is obscured by Democrats, and how convenient that is. What I mean by that is that, when your enemy is the Democrat, right, then you don't have to look at yourself, right? When your enemy is the Democrat, you don't have to look at fundamentals like the economy or economic policy. You can just focus on the latest, in your view, kind of asinine thing that Democrats do. And then you need seek no further as to where to aim your arrows. So the Democrats as a foil, they become the level of focus, which makes it impossible for people, whatever they're focusing on, it becomes impossible for them to look at themselves and actually take action to better their lives. They're too busy blaming the other party. I wanted to say a little bit more about this issue of military service. I found this quote from the National Priorities Organization, which is you ought to take a look at it. They've got a lot of good studies there. But this one was the story was war toll is taking its heaviest toll in poor rural areas. So the quote is, the notion that economic desperation leads to higher military enlistment and therefore higher death rates was borne out in a 2006 and 2007 study by the University of New Hampshire's Carsey Institute, which concluded that rural America was shouldering an undue burden in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Using data from the Defense Department, the White House Office of Management and Budget, and the Census Bureau, the study found that the death rate for outlying counties was 48% higher than in metropolitan or suburban counties. Though only 19% of the nation's adult population lives in rural areas, those areas suffered 26% of the casualties. So we all know the political breakdown of red and blue in the United States by rural and urban. It's a very stark contrast. And I just think that this is a good point to make. And if Democrats actually understood the points that I just made about some of these folks' grievances, they would be one step closer to actually making some positive improvements themselves. Okay? But let's think of what Democrats have to complain about. Their grievances are also real. Okay? They can point to being mocked as well, to having their very identity mocked and questioned endlessly, having to contend with violent people, with people who are heavily armed. I mean, we've gotten so used to it that nobody talks about it like this, but they're surrounded by people who are heavily armed and are increasingly showing themselves to be dangerous. So not only with their arms, but also with their germs at the moment, literally surrounded by people who are not protecting them, not caring about anybody else but themselves, and willing to kill others with their very breath. And of course, they have to contend with the latest examples of aggressive attack, with the January 6th insurrection and various lone wolf attacks and things like that basically reveal that we've got an increasing domestic fanaticism going on that is very scary. Okay, so Democrats have this type of thing to look at, to say we're being victimized. They are the problem, Now they should acknowledge that they have largely abandoned rural and working class people, and in the process have created some of the conditions necessary for more extremism and fanaticism to emerge. And that's where they don't want to go. Because again, they would have to look at themselves. They would have to see, like I referenced the shadow, I think last time. They would have to see their own shadow or their own sins, or however you want to refer to that. But they aren't doing that because their field of vision is obscured by the Republicans. The Republicans are their scapegoats, and they need look no further. When they get together, they talk about how dumb Republicans are, how scary they are, okay, and how much they need to fight back against Republicans. And again, the result is they take up much less bandwidth dealing with, well, how can we possibly solve the problems that probably have created conditions that have led to their anger? How can we stop this cycle and get off this gravy train that is continuing to elect Democratic representatives in urban areas, right? But doesn't necessarily do much beyond that to fix the problems involved in this cycle. Okay, so forgiveness is what neither side wants to do. Forgiveness entails first looking at yourself, and I think, and realizing that you've got the shadow. That in the Christian parlance, you've got the sin inside of you. That there is this original sin, and there's the sin that you've acted upon and done and thought and so on and so forth. And that this is the problem that you can work on, right? It's a part of you. You can't completely get rid of it, but you can work on it. They don't want to look at that. It's the hardest thing to do. It's the hardest thing to do for a lot of reasons, not just that, but because we are hardwired biologically to fight back. It's just a fact, like almost all animals. I don't know if it's true of every single one, but when it's cornered or when it's under attack or it feels it is, it doesn't start up a peace negotiation. It starts to get out the fangs and the claws. And I know that I do this. I'm not an exception. The other day somebody called me a bad name, let's say, it was something that I had literally not heard since I went to school, in high school. I come from kind of a fairly rough area, let's say. So I heard lots of stuff when I was in school, right, constantly. And to a certain extent, you get used to it. And to a certain extent, you decide to pick your battles, and you get pretty realistic, and you realize like there's sometimes when you should just like duck and run for cover, but like in certain situations, you also learn that you just have to strike back. This is what I learned, is that you have to bristle and strike back, or at least act like you possibly could, or you're going to invite more of some such thing, right? But that's context specific, and even if it is true, one has to acknowledge also that every time that people do this and sort of react based on their instincts, they perpetuate that cycle. And that we also must realize when we're grown-ups, lots of times we're really not in that situation. But what happened? I immediately sort of went back there. I was somewhat conscious, like, of the fact that I was, and I even remember saying to another person who was there, I think I should probably leave or else. And I will say, all I did was verbally spar. But the thing is, I walked away and I said to myself, did I have to do that? I felt kind of ashamed. And I don't feel that very often, actually. But I was like, man, you didn't do the best job you possibly could, because you didn't have to do that. And what purpose did it serve? Okay? Served no positive purpose. Didn't get me very riled up. Might have riled up the other person. To the extent it did, it didn't serve any positive purpose, okay? So I think not only the price, that I just said, which is you have to look inside yourself and realize that you've got this darkness in you, but also the price is time. Because the more I think about it, the more I think that just simply saying you need to look inside yourself and realize there's that shadow is not nearly good enough. As individuals, if we simply trained ourselves to take a little tiny moment of time to think about the consequences of reciprocation, to give ourselves 30 seconds, we could actually back down or just say, hey, look, not my fight, interested in something else. Or even more, hey, tell me, what the heck is going on with you that makes you this angry? But we don't train ourselves to give that much time. Think about what even more time does. Let's face it, there's a lot of things that seem egregious at the moment, but 10 years later, well, even 2 days later in a lot of cases, depending on the situation, seems less of an issue, or maybe you don't even remember it, right? So at any rate, giving ourselves time, it sounds easy, it's extremely hard. So I think people need to train themselves. If they have any sort of good intentions in them, they need to train themselves to take 10, 20, 30 seconds. And I know I'm going to be working on that. I do know too that forgiveness, or refusing, let's just back off from forgiveness for a second and just say refusing to react with hostility, is not always reciprocated. Sometimes the other party doubles down, senses weakness. But I will say, when I have been able to do this, it is almost always disarming. Even if they keep coming, they're thrown off. They don't know exactly what to do, because you have presented a context, a situation that they weren't prepared to deal with. It's kind of fun and interesting to watch how discombobulated they can be as they try to figure out, what do they have? Or sometimes they ignore it entirely and act as though you've said something else, right? So, you then say it again, so what's wrong with you? Can you and So at the very least, you'll have some fun watching them as you, confuse and discombobulate them. But sometimes, maybe not at the moment, but they may walk away with something changed. Something has changed in the way that at least they see you, if not the way they see the world. You may have knocked a little crack, a little bit of space in their wall. I don't know. Anyway, I do know it is disarming, and I mean that kind of literally. They don't know exactly where to aim their ammunition, or maybe they don't even have as much ammunition. I do want to bring this in here because a lot of people involved in these conflicts will say that they are Christians, and yet if you just Google vengeance Bible, okay, and see what kind of quotes come up, okay, and you will find that they all kind of revolve around this idea that, like I have here, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, right? I will repay. It's my business. That you should not avenge yourself, that vengeance is bad. It's not your place to do so. Put your sword back into its place. This is a quote from Jesus in Matthew. For all who take the sword will perish by the sword, right? In both the New and in the Old Testament, vengeance is typically reserved for God, and humans are encouraged not to take vengeance, or I guess in the Old Testament only to do so if it's God's agenda. And, in the New Testament, the consistent message seems to be that it's not our place. So if a lot of people involved in these internecine battles in the United States, let's say, who can't talk to their neighbor, who call somebody a name because they don't agree with them about a political point or a particular thinker or theological perspective, if they call themselves Christians, if they just take a look, I realize this is doesn't work. I realize this argument doesn't work, but I would still just call on people to ask themselves, how can you ignore all of that and not at least think about coming up with a strategy for at least part of the time, in some ways, actually trying it. I think it's extremely difficult. It's often talked about by people as though it's like feel good, namby-pamby, I don't know, wussery, right? Actually, I think it's extremely hard to just refuse to react and to basically become bigger than your enemy to that extent. It's very, very hard. In my experience, it's hard. Also, we see that it's rarely done, so it must be very hard. So I think it would take a very big and actually quite powerful person and community to be able to do it. So again, reminder, next thing I'm going to talk about is Out of Babylon by Walter Brueggemann. All right, so we're going to go into Christian theology. You don't need to be a Christian or a theologian to get something out of these types of sessions. This is a place I go to every once in a while. I don't do it in a way that's going to insist that you basically become some kind of a particular kind of Christian or any kind of Christian to get something out of it. I do think that since it is a part of my life and it's so much a part of a lot of other people's lives, in the United States in particular, to this day, that to not address this issue is to be delinquent in covering these types of topics. So that's where we're going to go. Get the book if you dare. I'll see you next time.